Okay, we're live. Okay, so in this live we're going to be going over the continuation from the last live we had. So we talked about the muscle and strength training pyramid, and we went through some of the more prioritized topics. Now we're going to go over more specific ones that are at the top of the pyramid. It means they're sort of in the order of priority. It's lower down the list, but it doesn't mean it's not important. Especially if you're trying to get those finite details, trying to gain more strength, trying to get better understanding of what you should be doing to exercise. These could be the key differences between you getting the results you want and not. So this is what we're going to go over today. So 3 main topics, okay? First is exercise selection. Then we're going to go over rest periods and then tempo. To start with, we're going to, previous to this is progression on that list that we didn't cover before, but Josh is going to go over progressive overload, which will be mainly what that topic's on. So I'll let him do that and we'll move on to exercise selection first. So what I mean by exercise selection is basically what we need to realize when we are in the gym and just trying to gain some muscle or whatever we're trying to achieve is to prioritize. You know, what are your goals for what you're trying to do? What key muscle groups am I trying to hit for that one session and then also for that period? I talked previously about periodization, which means as micro and macro. Micro means, you know, within a week, you know, what are you trying to achieve? And then macro is within a certain amount of months. Maybe you're trying to lose weight, maybe you're trying to gain muscle. But we need to prioritize what we need to do for an individual session, and that's why exercise selection is important. There are 3 key aspects of exercise selection that we need to think about. First is specificity. So, you know, how sort of specific are your exercises to what your goals are? So you are going to achieve specific gains by doing specific movements. If you're someone who would like to get better in a squat, get better in a deadlift, or maybe if you're someone who wants to be a lot faster in a run, you need to be squatting, and you need to be deadlifting, and you need to be doing that run. There's no need or point in you avoiding what you have to practice in order to achieve, because we know there is muscle memory, and you gain better neuromuscular control the more that the more specific you are to what you're trying to achieve. So specificity is the first important point. Second of all, when it comes to exercise selection, we need to realize that we spoke previously about hypertrophy, which is muscle growth, but that is not what's important first when you're trying to pick up a new exercise. It's not optimal when you're trying to learn the movement. First, you need to become an expert in the movement in order for you to achieve growth in that area. So take the weight down first when you're first starting the exercise. Whatever exercise you do select, make sure that you're doing it at a weight that you are comfortable with first, and then think about building it up once you have got the form correct. And also with that in mind, select an exercise that you feel you are able to accomplish. Don't start off with something that is too difficult for you to do. You often will see this in the gym. People are lifting, performing a specific exercise, maybe like a clean and jerk, where they're not 100% comfortable in doing it. That's where you pick up injuries. And also you're not helping yourself at all, because you're not actually utilizing muscles. You are compensating and not getting the best sort of bang for your buck when you go into the gym. So, the second point with that is that hypertrophy, don't worry about that first, worry about lifting a low weight. Thirdly, you have to understand that variety is important. So there was a study done that looked at, it was a Smith machine squat. And they looked at one group that were just using the Smith machine when performing a squat, and then another group that were doing a split squat, squat with dumbbells, goblet squat, barbell squat, different variations of the same movement. And what they found was when they went back to perform that one Smith machine squat, that one group that did the variation compared to the group that just did the Smith machine as a practice actually were much better and able to lift higher weights. So as much as it is important for you to practice that one exercise, once you practice it enough, incorporate different forms of that so that you can activate muscles which are, not used to its fullest when you're just performing one exercise. If you think about the different muscle groups that you're using, you may be compensating or overusing one specific muscle group, and then performing another muscle is not performing or lifting with enough force. That means that over time you're going to be detrimental in that one movement and not achieve that to the best of its fullest. So you need that variety so that you can train a muscle group in a different exercise that you will need to do that one exercise. So that's the third point when we're talking about exercise selection, is the variety of your training. Next, which really important points alongside specificity, so those 3 points underneath that were all under specificity. But if we're thinking about how you're going to get the best out of a gym session, you have to think about the efficiency of what you're doing. When we talk about efficiency, we are talking about how many muscle groups are being used when you are doing a specific exercise, and are you getting enough activation of enough muscle groups within a single session? With that in mind, the key thing that often is talked about is compound over isolation is more important when you are especially first starting off in the gym, because you are utilizing more muscles at once. You're also not, by doing a muscle at a time, you're not actually, as much as you think you are, growing that particular muscle as fast as you were if you were doing a muscle an exercise that incorporates multiple of the similar muscles. So what's important for you to realize that first starting off, do exercises that incorporate loads of different movements in one. So like a squat is better than just doing a knee extension, for example, because you're using the quads, hamstrings and glutes rather than just the quads. You also have to think about how much time you've got in the gym. If you're someone who's got a busy life and you can't really get to the gym that often, is there much point in you doing a bicep curl compared to doing a burpee into a shoulder press? Because you're actually burning more calories, you're getting fitter in that one particular time that you're doing that exercise. So if we're talking about the general population, so the general client population that would come to a clinic like ours, they're not originally going to be training 4-5 times a week. And you have to make a program regime based on how much time that you have. So that efficiency in that essence is really important. On top of that, on the other hand, there are some clients who are a lot more well versed in their training, and that's where isolating movement, so a bicep curl on its own or a calf raise on its own, is something that actually might be beneficial for them. So it doesn't just apply to everyone. It can, the efficiency might be better spent if you were just to focus on a particular muscle that you know is a weak link that you have. That also goes with injury. So if you have picked up an injury, to start off with, isometric and isolation exercises are better than compound exercises. So that's important for you to realize the efficiency of what you're doing and how much time you've got. Okay. Next we're going to move on from exercise selection and talk about rest periods. So when we talk about rest periods, we're talking about the time in between reps, so the time in between a single movement, so let's say a bench press, a single press, and also the time between a set. So if you're doing 8 repetitions over 3 sets, the time between each of those 3 sets is also something you need to realize. So previously in research, they had thought that, decreasing rest periods was more beneficial for fitness levels and gaining strength, because they originally found a correlation between what we call growth hormone, which helps to promote muscle growth, and a decrease in rest periods and increase in stress. But what they didn't realize that is correlation and causation are not the same. They found that growth hormone was going up, but it doesn't mean that it was going as a direct result of the decreased rest times. So we now have a better and clearer idea that if rest periods are too short, there's an overall reduction in the volume or intensity of an overall session, as you may have to, and often have to, decrease load. We know that what will happen is, as a result of higher loads and you are lifting more and more in the gym, those rest periods are going to have to go up short, purely based of the fact that you won't be able to maintain that level of intensity. So that's important for you to consider. Have a sufficient amount of rest. Too much rest isn't going to be too beneficial, but have a sufficient amount of rest if you are going to a higher load. But what we do know that low periods of rest are actually beneficial for if you're just doing total body exercises, or you are doing supersets, which means that you are going from one exercise to another deliberately. That can be of the same muscle group or different muscle groups in order for you to improve your fitness levels. Low rest periods are better in those instances. So overall, if we're thinking about building muscle, take more rest. If we're thinking about increasing strength, take more rest. But if we're thinking about fitness levels, take less rest. That's sort of self-explanatory, but if we do need to think about how that will work in the grand scheme of how we're organising our sessions as well. You have to give yourself sufficient rest, and that's where some people do falter, as they're not giving themselves enough, or perhaps they're giving themselves too much in between sets, going on your phone, for example, getting distracted, talking to people in the gym is something that we will often do. So that's something that you need to realize, that you're not actually getting as much effectiveness out of your sessions if you're doing that. So as I mentioned, the rest periods is a topic that's a little bit more nuanced and a lot less important compared to what we first went over. But it's still important nonetheless for you to grasp and get your head around. Okay, the last point I wanted to mention is the tempo, which is sort of the top of that pyramid. The tempo refers to the speed of a lift. So overall, it's quite simple. If you increase load, you will see a indirect relationship with the speed of a lift. So increase load, decrease the speed, purely based off what our bodies are able to muster. We're not going to be able to lift the same weight at the same speed, especially if we're going up and we're trying to build. We're going to take more time. That's not a bad thing. The overall recommendation for building muscle is the down phase, what we call eccentric, which I have mentioned previously before in lives, is is better. So if we're slowing that down, it's a lot better. So we go slow down and fast up. That's where we see the best results with building muscle. The reason for this actually is because you expended less energy, so you're able to then lift more overall. Intensity and frequency and volume, if we're talking about that we did the first time, which was the second step of that pyramid, that's something that we can change by changing the tempo. You're also with the slower speed, you're able to control a heavier load better, which means that decreased risk of injury, but also that muscle is getting more time under tension, and that's something I'm going to speak about in a little bit as well. And then, as I mentioned sort of before, it allows for more volume, so you're then the more time spent lifting in the amount of time that you have, the higher the volume. So tempo is important for you to consider. So when I just mentioned time under tension, the magnitude of the tension as well is important. So not just the time spent on the load, but also the magnitude of it, which basically means the force that you're operating at. If you have increased tension over a long more time in the muscle, then you are increasing the amount of force that's going through the muscle, therefore growing that muscle faster. On the contrary to sort of slower reps, overall, taking your time with the exercises is better. But what we do know when it comes to where it's not actually important and it's better for you to go faster is if you're trying to build power, build speed, increase fitness levels, cardiovascular fitness, etc. Going faster is better, but then you're only able to do that at a lower load. So then we're thinking about, okay, are we thinking about strength here, or are we thinking about fitness? So tailor your sessions when it comes to the time that you spend on them and during the exercise on what sort of your goals are and what phase you are in your training, and that sort of brings everything together. Because if you incorporate all of what we've sort of mentioned, even from the very start, so we'll go back to that. So if I were to wrap up the entire 2 lives, then you have the adherence is the most important, and the tempo is the least in terms of what you need to focus on. But when it comes down to the specifics, the ones that I mentioned today are more important in terms of getting the fundamentals correct. The previous slide is more important. So overall, if you were to think about firstly your adherence, how often and how realistic you are with your training, think about the volume, intensity and frequency, then the progression, exercise selection, rest periods and tempo. If you think about all of those together, you can plan your session accordingly and plan your month's sessions accordingly. So we are then able to have a much better likelihood of achieving our goals if we were to plan ahead and plan using those key points that we mentioned. So that is sort of, that will conclude all of the 2 lives, and hopefully with what I've mentioned, you're able to have a better understanding of what you should be doing and focusing on. If you are someone who is just getting started, think about your adherence, how realistic, enjoyable and flexible it is. But if you are someone who's a lot more further down the line, then we're thinking about the specifics. Hopefully that answers a lot of your queries when it comes to training, and I will leave it there. Okay.